In a majestic building so tall it almost touched the clouds of Fifth Avenue, a contract uniting nations was being celebrated. "To the future of the Sanders Group and our new transcontinental alliance," exclaimed Julian Sanders, raising a crystal glass that cost more than the annual rent of most of his employees. The sound of crystal clinking echoed in the conference room on the 55th floor, a space that seemed to float above the clouds of New York City. The tempered glass walls offered a panoramic view of the urban skyline, but the real view was over the immense mahogany table, a navy blue leather-bound contract freshly signed with a solid gold pen. At just 32 years old, Julian felt like the king of the world. His suit, a bespoke design brought exclusively from Milan, fit his athletic figure like a second skin, projecting an image of absolute and untouchable power. He had achieved what his father never could, closing the deal with the Alfred brothers, the most influential oil and construction magnates in the Middle East. Before him, Michael and Oliver Alfayed smiled with that impenetrable courtesy characteristic of those who have negotiated empires for generations. They wore impeccable Western suits, but maintained a rigidity in their posture that denoted a hidden tension, something Julian, blinded by his own arrogance, interpreted as respect. "It's an honor, Mr. Sanders," said Michael, the older of the two, with a smooth and perfect accent. "Your vision for expansion in Los Angeles is bold. Very few men have the courage to risk so much capital in a single move." "Risk is for those who don't know what they're doing, Michael," replied Julian, taking a sip of vintage champagne. "For me, this is simply the next logical step. Tomorrow, when the headlines announce this merger, Sanders stocks will soar to new heights." Laughter filled the room. Julian's advisors, a group of men and women in grey suits who agreed with everything their boss said, joined the celebration with rehearsed chuckles. The atmosphere smelled of success, old money, and unbridled ambition. In the far corner of the room, almost blending in with the shadows of a decorative plant, was Nadia. No one was looking at her. To the powerful men in that room, Nadia was not a person. She was a function. She wore the grey pearl uniform of the cleaning service, an immaculate white apron, and her hair was tied up in an invisible net. Her hands, reddened from constant use of industrial cleaners, held a silver tray with which she silently collected empty glasses and discarded linen napkins. Nadia was 24 years old, but her dark, deep eyes carried the weight of several lives. She worked double shifts to send money to her sick mother and save to finish her literature studies, a dream that seemed increasingly distant amid the noise of vacuum cleaners and the smell of floor wax. She moved like a ghost among the executives, dodging elbows and grand gestures. Her golden rule was simple: be invisible. If they don't see you, they won't yell at you. If they don't notice you, they won't fire you. Excellent. Julian clapped his hands, breaking Nadia's train of thought. "Gentlemen, the helicopter is ready on the helipad. I have a reservation at the revolving restaurant to celebrate properly. The pilot is waiting for us. In 15 minutes, we'll be toasting over the city. It will be a pleasure to have you join us," said Oliver Alfayed, slightly bowing his head. Julian turned to his personal assistant. "Make sure the press has the statement at 5 p.m., not a minute before, not a minute after. I want to see the faces of my competitors when they find out the Alfayeds are mine." Nadia approached the head of the table to remove the empty champagne bottle. She was right behind the chairs of the Alfayed brothers. The noise of the celebration had slightly diminished as the executives began to gather their briefcases and tablets. It was in that moment of relative calm, shielded by the general murmur and ambient music, that Michael leaned toward his brother Oliver. Their faces were serious, their smiles had faded the moment they believed Julian's attention was elsewhere. "The prophecy," whispered Michael. His voice was low, guttural, a whisper that slithered through the air conditioning like a venomous snake. Nadia froze. Her hand, about to grab a crystal glass, stopped in mid-air. The world around her seemed to halt. The glow of the lights, the distant laughter, the smell of expensive perfume, all faded away. Only that phrase echoed in her brain, activating a part of her memory that she kept like a sacred treasure. It couldn't be. She must have heard wrong. But Oliver responded with a coldness that froze the blood in Nadia's veins. "No, we will make it happen," said Oliver, adjusting the gold buttons on his shirt. Nadia felt the ground opening beneath her feet. There was no mistake, no confusion. She had grown up hearing those words, that cadence, that ancient music in her great-grandfather Abraham's voice. "When we board the helicopter, the hydraulic brakes will fail," Michael had said. "Yes, a regrettable accident. The company will be ours before they find the body," Oliver had replied. Terror hit her with the force of a physical impact. Her heart began to race, pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Julian Sanders. The young millionaire was standing, laughing at some joke, completely oblivious to the fact that the men he had just shaken hands with had signed his death sentence. They were going to kill him right there on the helipad of his own building. Nadia's mind screamed, "Don't get involved, you are nobody. If you speak, they will destroy you. Remember the rule, be invisible." But then the voice of his great-grandfather Abraham echoed in his memory, as clear as if the elder were standing beside him. "Silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit, Abibt. Fear is human, but honor is divine." Nadia saw how the Alpha brothers stood up smiling again, putting on their masks of perfect partners. Julian pointed them toward the private elevator, which led directly to the helipad. "Mr. Sanders, we won't be able to accompany you on the helicopter because we still have pending matters, but we will see you there on time. We will go in our car." "Very well, gentlemen. In that case, you may leave. I will be there in a moment," Julian said gallantly. "The sky awaits me." As everyone left and Julian waited for his turn to exit, Nadia saw a man marching to his death. She dropped the tray she was holding. The crash of silver and crystal shattering against the marble floor was deafening. Julian turned to her and frowned, his triumphant smile turning into a grimace of annoyance. "What the hell?" Julian began to say. Nadia didn't wait, didn't pick up the shards, didn't apologize. She broke protocol, broke her invisibility, and broke the distance separating her from her boss. She ran to him. "Mr. Sanders!" she shouted, her voice cracking with urgency. "No, don't get on." Julian froze. "What does that mean?" Julian asked, his voice icy. Nadia reached him, breathless, and committed the capital sin. She touched him. She grabbed the sleeve of his $5,000 Italian suit with her desperate hands. "It's a trap," Nadia pleaded, looking directly into his eyes, desperately searching for a trace of humanity, of doubt. "Please don't get on that helicopter. Listen to me, they want to kill you." The silence that followed was absolute, dense, heavy with disbelief. Julian looked at Nadia's hand on his arm, looked at the invisible stain her contact left on his perfection. Then he looked at her sweaty, terrified face. He didn't see the warning. He only saw the dirt invading his golden world. He let out a laugh, a short, dry, cruel laugh. "Kill me?" Julian repeated as if it were the most absurd joke in the world. "What are you talking about, woman? Have you been drinking the remnants of the glasses you clean?" "Sir, I heard them speaking in Arabic," Nadia insisted, tears beginning to well up from frustration. The Alpha brothers, who had noticed Julian's delay in leaving, returned and listened in silence as she told him not to get on the helicopter. Then Michael Alfide stepped forward. His face was a mask of dignified offense. "Mr. Sanders, is this the kind of staff you employ?" Michael asked with a tone of refined disdain. "A hysterical woman interrupting your partners." She flinched at seeing them. She had been discovered by the potential assassins, but she could no longer back down. She had to confront them now. They said the hydraulic brakes would fail. They said it would be an accident. "Sir, please believe me." Oliver Alfair let out a relaxed laugh, shaking his head. Poor girl, she must be hallucinating from the fumes of the cleaning chemicals. "Julian, this is embarrassing." The embarrassment was what triggered Julian. Not the danger, but the shame of being exposed to such a vulgar scene in front of his new international partners. His ego, inflated and fragile, could not tolerate a cleaner questioning his control, his security, his moment of glory. With a sudden, violent motion, Julian shook his arm, throwing Nadia back. She stumbled over her own feet and fell painfully onto the hard floor, hitting her hip. "Get your hands off me," Julian roared, his face red with anger. "Who do you think you are? A mere cleaner thinks she knows what my partners are saying. You are crazy." Nadia half got up, propping herself on her elbows, the physical pain eclipsed by the terror of what was about to happen. "I'm not crazy. I know what they said. I know because my great-grandfather was—" "I don't care who your great-grandfather was," Julian cut her off, pointing at her with an accusing finger. "I care that you ruined my suit and insulted my guests." "Security!" Two security guards, large men in black suits and earpieces, appeared almost instantly, as if they had sprung from the walls. "Get her out of here," Julian ordered, adjusting the lapel of his suit with nervous gestures. "And make sure she never sets foot in this building again. You're fired." "Fired." The guards grabbed Nadia by the arms, lifting her off the ground like a rag doll. "Don't let me go," Nadia shouted, kicking futilely. "Mr. Sanders, I beg you. You will die. Don't get on. It's a trap." Julian turned to the Alphas, regaining his composure with visible effort, forcing his best apologetic smile. "Gentlemen, I ask for your forgiveness. It's hard to find good help these days. Poor people always looking for drama to get attention." "Don't worry, Julian," Michael said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Given this incident, to put your mind at ease, we will accompany you until you board the helicopter." The three men entered the elevator. Julian pressed the button for the helipad. The polished steel doors began to close slowly, turning into a mirror reflecting the final scene. Nadia being dragged to the service exit, shouting truths that no one wanted to hear. "Mr. Sanders!" was Nadia's last piercing cry before the elevator doors sealed shut, taking Julian. In his vertical coffin, Julian sighed, looking at his reflection in the metal. He looked impeccable again. "What madness," he murmured to himself. "What madness." "Yes," Oliver agreed, watching the elevator numbers rise. "A real shame that people don't know their place." As the elevator ascended toward the cloudy sky, taking Julian to his fatal destination, downstairs, Nadia struggled against the guards. Tears streamed down her face, not for the dismissal, not for the humiliation, but for the helplessness. Nadia stood there on the cold landing of the emergency stairs, the echo of her own screams still vibrating in the air. Her body ached, her pride burned, but above all her heart weighed heavy. She could leave, go home, hug her mother, and forget about that arrogant man who had treated her like trash. He had chosen his fate, mocked her, and deserved whatever would happen to him. But then she closed her eyes and saw Abraham's face. She saw his wrinkled hands turning the pages of an old book in Arabic. She remembered what he used to tell her about the value of life. Any life, even those who do not deserve it. Nadia looked up at the concrete ceiling that separated her from the helipad. She faintly heard the dull sound of helicopter blades starting to spin. No, she couldn't let him die, even if he hated her, even if he had fired her. Her conscience was all she had, and it was worth more than all the millions of Sanders. She wiped her tears with the back of her dirty hand, her eyes hardened. The scared girl disappeared, and in her place stood a descendant of a lineage that had survived wars and deserts. If they wouldn't listen to her for good, they would listen to her for bad. Nadia looked at the wall, There, behind a red glass, was the fire alarm lever. "Do you think I'm crazy, Julian?" Nadia whispered into the void. "Well, you'll see what this crazy woman is capable of." With a determined movement, she broke the glass with her elbow. The fire alarm exploded with an acoustic violence that made Nadia's teeth rattle. Seconds later, the ceiling's sprinkler system came to life. It wasn't a gentle drizzle, it was an industrial deluge of cold, dirty water that had accumulated in the pipes for years, drenching Nadia to the bone in an instant. The security guards, who moments before had pushed her toward the exit, froze for a second, confused by the sudden chaos. The white lights of the corridor flickered and were replaced by flashing red strobe lights that spun wildly, painting the walls blood red. "What have you done, lunatic?" shouted one of the guards, wiping water from his eyes and lunging at her. He activated the general alarm. Nadia did not resist. This time, she allowed herself to be grabbed, feeling the cold water seep into her grey uniform, clinging to her skin like a second layer of shame. Her elbow throbbed where she had struck the glass, and a trickle of blood mixed with the water running down her arm. But a strange calm had taken hold of her chest. She had done it. The helicopter would not take off. The skyscraper's security protocols were strict. In the event of an active fire alarm, all elevators would lock or automatically descend to the ground, and any aerial operation at the helipad would be strictly prohibited due to the risk of thermal currents or smoke. Julian Sanders would not fly today. He would hate her, sue her, maybe even send her to jail, but he would be alive to do so. As the guard cuffed her with plastic ties, tightening them with unnecessary force, Nadia's mind disconnected from the physical pain and traveled back in time. The smell of rancid water and oxidized metal from the corridor faded, replaced by the warm, spicy aroma of cardamom and pipe tobacco. She was back in the small living room of her childhood apartment, sitting on the worn rug at the feet of her great-grandfather's green velvet armchair, Abraham. Abraham was not a wealthy man, but he was a millionaire in stories. He had arrived in the country with nothing more than a leather suitcase and a command of 5 languages that had allowed him to survive in a hostile world. His hands were stained with ink, and his eyes were the color of black olives, shining with intelligence and nostalgia. "Guido," little Nadia, 6 years old, would say, tracing Arabic letters in an old notebook with her finger. "Why do I have to learn this? No one at school speaks like that. They laugh at me." Abraham would set aside his pipe and lift her to sit on his lap, his large, calloused hands enveloping her with infinite tenderness. "Nadia Rabibti." His voice was deep, like the rumble of a distant drum. They laugh because they fear what they do not understand. Language is not just words to ask for bread or water. Language is the key to truth. If you speak the language of your enemy, you no longer have enemies. Just naked men with secrets they believe no one hears. The elder would turn the page of the book and point to an ancient phrase. "Listen well, Yanura. Those who know the language of a people are safe from their wickedness." "Safe?" she would ask with wide-open eyes. "Yes, ignorance is a blindfold over the eyes, my girl. Knowledge is the sword that cuts it. Never be ashamed of who you are, nor where you come from. Your blood has crossed deserts and seas. You have the strength of the cedars of Lebanon in your spine. Even if the world forces you to kneel to clean its floors, your spirit must remain standing." The memory was so vivid that Nadia could almost feel the warmth of her great-grandfather's hand on her shoulder. He had died years ago, but his legacy, that useless knowledge her friends mocked, had just transformed into the most powerful weapon within the Sanders group. A sharp tug brought her back to reality. "Come on!" barked the guard, pushing her toward the stairs. "The head of security wants to see you downstairs. You will pay every cent of the damages and pray they don't charge you for the fire department's operation." Nadia. She descended the steps, stumbling with water dripping from her hair and blurring her vision. She didn't care about the money. She had nothing they could take from her except her dignity, and she had already pawned that to save a man who looked at her as if she were an insect. Meanwhile, 49 floors above, the situation was a chaos of ruined luxury. Julian Sanders' private elevator had come to a jarring halt between the 48th and 49th floors. The elegant lights in the cabin went out and were replaced by emergency lighting. A calm, synthetic voice announced over the speakers, "Attention! Fire alarm activated. Security protocol in progress. The elevator will descend to the ground floor. Please remain calm." "Damn it!" Julian shouted, pounding the polished steel wall with his fist. The movement made the champagne in his stomach churn. He couldn't believe it. The pinnacle moment of his career, the triumphant exit to the sky, interrupted by a miserable alarm. "I'm so sorry, gentlemen," Julian said, turning to the Alford brothers. His own voice sounded tense in the confined space. "It must be a technical error, a faulty sensor. As soon as we get down, heads will roll." Michael Alford didn't seem upset. In fact, he looked strangely tense, but not because of the alarm. He exchanged a quick glance with Oliver. The helicopter plan had been thwarted. The scheduled hydraulic failure couldn't occur if the aircraft didn't take off. "It's inconvenient," Oliver said, smoothing his suit. "But safety comes first, right, Julian?" "Of course," Julian replied, forcing a smile. "It's just a delay. We'll drive. My driver will take us to the restaurant. Nothing will ruin this night." The elevator began to descend slowly, too slowly for Julian's liking. Each floor they descended was another minute of humiliation, another minute in which his image of absolute control crumbled before his new partners. And in the back of his mind, an irritating doubt began to sting. That girl, the cleaner, had shouted something about a trap. She had mentioned the helicopter, and minutes later, the alarm went off just to prevent them from going up. Coincidence? Julian thought, clenching his jaw. She's resentful. She did it on purpose. She knew I was going and activated the alarm to ruin my night. Is she going to wish she was never born? When the elevator doors finally opened in the main lobby, the scene was nightmarish. The white marble foyer, usually a temple of silence and corporate elegance, was pandemonium. Hundreds of employees were evacuating the building, drenched by the sprinklers that had turned the atrium into a slippery pool. The sirens of fire trucks could already be heard approaching along Fifth Avenue. Julian stepped out of the elevator, flanked by the Alford brothers. His Italian suit was dry thanks to the airtight elevator, but his mood was soaked with fury. "I want the person responsible," Julian shouted, his voice echoing over the noise of the crowd. "I want to know who activated that alarm." The head of security, a burly man with a bulldog face, rushed over to him, splashing through the water, holding someone by the arm. "Mr. Sanders," the chief said. "We have her. It was her. We caught her by the alarm box on the 50th floor. She broke the glass." Julian looked down. There, soaked, shivering from the cold but holding her head high, was Nadia. Her grey uniform clung to her body, revealing her fragility, but her dark eyes burned with an intensity that unsettled him for a second. Julian's anger exploded. He forgot about his partners, forgot about protocol, forgot that he was in public. "You!" he bellowed, advancing toward her until he was inches from her face. "Do you realize what you've done? Do you have any idea how much it costs to stop this building for an hour? Millions! You caused millions in damages just for a poor girl's tantrum." Nadia didn't back down. Water dripped from her nose and chin, mixing with the tears she refused to shed again. "It wasn't a tantrum," she said, her voice steady despite her chattering teeth. "I saved your life." "Shut up." Julian raised his hand as if to hit her, but stopped at the last second, aware of the security cameras and witnesses. "You're sick. You invent movie conspiracies to feel important. Save me? The only thing you did was sign your prison sentence. Michael and Oliver approached slowly, watching the scene with caution. Julian, Michael said, placing a hand on the millionaire's shoulder. Calm down, it's not worth it. She's just a deranged employee. Let the police handle it, and let's go. The car must be waiting. Julian took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. Michael was right. He was losing his composure in front of the financial elite. You're right, Julian said, smoothing his blazer. Take her away. Let the police deal with it. I want charges for property damage, reckless endangerment, and whatever else they can come up with to keep her behind bars for a long time. The guards pulled Nadia to take her outside, where the blue lights of the police cars were already reflecting off the wet glass of the lobby. Nadia felt panic wash over her. If they took her now, Julian would go with them. The helicopter had failed, but they would find another way. They would kill him in the car or at dinner or tomorrow, and she would rot in a cell, knowing her sacrifice had been in vain. She had to do something. She had to prove she wasn't crazy. She remembered the exact words, the phrase Oliver had said with such arrogance in the meeting room. Just as the guards dragged her near the Alford brothers, Nadia dug her heels into the wet ground, stopping abruptly, turned her head, and looked directly into Oliver Alford's eyes. And then she shouted, "Not in Portuguese!" She yelled in the language of the Desert Kings, with the perfect pronunciation that Abraham had burned into her soul. Skutil melk saikunu diba. The phrase sliced through the humid air of the lobby, sharper than any blade. The fall of the king will be the rise of the jackals. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Oliver Alford stopped abruptly as if he had received an invisible bullet. His usually composed face turned pale in an instant. Michael spun around sharply, his eyes widening with a mix of shock and dangerous recognition. Julian, who was about to exit through the revolving door, also halted. He didn't understand the words, but he grasped the reaction. He saw the fear in his associate's eyes. He witnessed how Oliver's arrogance crumbled for a fraction of a second. Silence fell again in the lobby, only broken by the constant dripping of water. Julian slowly turned to Nadia. She was there, breathing heavily, supported by the guards, but her gaze was fixed on the Arabs, defiant, powerful. "What did you say?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nadia didn't look at Julian. She kept her eyes locked on Oliver, holding the stare down. "Ask them, Mr. Sanders," Nadia replied in Portuguese with a clear voice. "Ask what it means. It's what they said when they thought the ignorant maid couldn't hear them." Oliver regained his composure, although a treacherous drop of sweat trickled down his forehead. "He's talking nonsense in a language he doesn't know, Julian. They're meaningless sounds. Let's leave." But Julian Sanders hadn't reached the top by being foolish. He was arrogant, yes, but he had the instincts of a shark, and his instincts had just detected blood in the water. Oliver's reaction had been too visceral, too real. Julian looked at his associates, then at Nadia, the drenched and humiliated woman who had just cast a curse in an ancient language. And for the first time all night, cold doubt coiled around his heart. "Let her go," Julian ordered the guards. "But sir," protested the head of security. "I said let her go," Julian shouted. The guards released her. Nadia rubbed her sore wrists but didn't flee. She stood there in the puddle of her own disgrace, waiting for the verdict. "No one is going anywhere," Julian said, his gaze oscillating between the Arabs and the woman. "Suddenly I'm very curious about languages." His normally cold and calculating grey eyes scanned his associates' faces with the precision of a laser searching for microfractures in a steel structure. Oliver Alford let out a nervous laugh, a brief, high-pitched sound that died almost instantly. "Please, Julian," Oliver said, regaining his condescending tone. "This is ridiculous. The girl is repeating phrases she probably heard in some cheap horror movie. Guttural sounds without meaning. Are we going to let a deranged employee disrupt a billion-dollar deal? Michael, the older brother, stepped forward, imposing his physical presence between Julian and Nadia. His posture was rigid, threatening. "It's an offense, Mr. Sanders," Michael said, his deep voice echoing with feigned authority. "In our culture, for a servicewoman to shout at us like that is grounds for severe punishment. If you can't control your staff, perhaps we need to reconsider our perception of your leadership." It was a veiled threat, a classic negotiation tactic, attacking the opponent's ego to distract him. On any other day, Julian would have fallen into the trap. He would have ordered Nadia taken away to demonstrate his power. But today was not just any day. Today, Julian's survival instinct, that sixth sense that had kept him alive in the corporate jungle, was screaming alarms louder than fire sirens. He had seen the fear in Oliver's eyes. It was just a flash, a fraction of a second, when Nadia shouted that phrase in Arabic, and Julian Sanders hadn't reached the top by ignoring details. "No one is leaving yet," Julian said, ignoring Michael's threat. He turned to Nadia, who was still trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline burning through her veins. "You," Julian said, pointing at her, "repeat in Portuguese exactly what you just shouted." Nadia swallowed hard. Her throat was dry, scratchy. She knew she was walking a tightrope suspended over an abyss. If she failed, if she hesitated, the Alford brothers would convince Julian that she was crazy, and her fate would be sealed. She looked, Oliver in the eyes, defiant. She remembered Abraham, her great-grandfather, sitting in his armchair, telling her that the truth was a lion. "You don't need to defend it, just let it loose." "It means the fall of the king will be the rise of the jackals," Nadia said, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. "It's an old proverb, but they didn't use it as a proverb, Mr. Sanders. They used it as a sentence." She turned to Julian, ignoring Michael's murderous glare. "They said in the conference room, right after Mr. Alford turned to celebrate, when he gets on, the helicopter, the hydraulic brakes will fail. The company will be ours before they find the body." Those were his exact words. "It's not a movie or madness. It's murder." The silence that followed was tomb-like. The remaining employees in the lobby, the security guards, even the receptionist, all held their breath. "No!" Oliver roared, finally losing his composure. "It's a slander. It's certainly a corporate spy sent by your competitors. Trying to sabotage the business?" "Sabotage?" Julian interjected, raising an eyebrow. "Why would a spy save my life by preventing me from getting into a faulty helicopter? If they wanted to sabotage me, they would let me crash." Julian's logic hit the Alford brothers like a hammer. Michael gritted his teeth, realizing they had underestimated their host's paranoid intelligence. "The helicopter is perfectly fine," Michael insisted, changing tactics. "It's a state-of-the-art machine. If she says it's going to fail, it's because she did something herself. She's the saboteur." "I clean tables, sir," Nadia replied, with a dignity that contrasted with her drenched appearance. "I don't know anything about mechanics, but I know Arabic. I know what I heard." Julian ran a hand through his wet hair. His mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. He had two options: believe his multi-millionaire associates and get rid of the woman, risking getting into a vehicle that could be his tomb, or believe in the machinery and risk the most important business of his life. But there was a third option, one that would allow him to test the truth without showing his cards. He took out his phone, a state-of-the-art encrypted device, and wrote a message. "Captain, change of plans. The fire alarm blocked the takeoff. I want you to do a complete inspection of the aircraft, specifically the hydraulic brake system and the main rotor. I want a report in 10 minutes. Don't touch anything, just inspect." The tension in Oliver's shoulders was visible. Michael maintained his poker face, but his hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides. "This is an insult," Michael said quietly. reviewing your own helicopter based on the delusions of a maid. We're leaving, Julian. The deal is still on, but our patience has run out. We'll see you tomorrow, if you decide to act like a serious businessman." The brothers turned to leave toward the exit, where their limousine and escort were surely waiting. "Wait!" Julian's voice was a whip. "Are you detaining us?" Oliver asked, turning around incredulously. "I'm inviting you," Julian corrected with a cold smile. "We had a dinner reservation, remember? At the revolving restaurant. The helicopter can't fly, but my car is at the entrance. We'll go together." "We already said we would go in our own vehicle," Michael quickly replied. "I insist." Julian stepped toward them, invading their personal space. "It's my city. It's my celebration. It's my armored car. Besides, I want to make it up to you for this unpleasant incident." Then he did. Something no one expected. He turned to the security guards, who were still watching Nadia. "And she comes with us." Nadia jerked her head up. "What, Mr. Sanders?" The head of security began. "I said she comes with us," Julian repeated. His tone allowed no discussion. "If she's lying, I want her present when the mechanics report confirms that the helicopter is perfect. Then I'll personally hand her over to the police for industrial terrorism. And if she's telling the truth, well, I'll want her to explain how she learned classical Arabic while cleaning floors." It was a masterstroke. Julian kept his enemies close and his potential savior under control. If the Alford brothers refused to get in the car with her, they would confirm their fear. If they accepted, Julian would have control of the environment. "This is absurd," Oliver spat. "I will not travel in the same car as this filthy woman." "It's a large limousine, Oliver," Julian said, his voice hardening. "And it's bulletproof. You should feel safe, unless there's something else to worry about." The insinuation hung in the air. Michael understood that they had no choice. If they refused now, Julian's suspicion would turn into certainty. They had to play the game. They had to get in the car, keep calm, and activate the plan B they had whispered about, the ambush on the outskirts. "All right," Michael said, adjusting his tie with a sharp motion. "Let's finish this farce. But I warn you, Julian, after tonight, the price of our alliance will rise considerably for this disrespect." "I'll take that into account," Julian replied. Julian gestured to the head of security. "Bring them in without handcuffs. She won't escape." Nadia felt her legs weaken, getting into a car with the men who wanted to kill her. Boss, and with the boss who despised her. It was madness. It was stepping into the wolf's den. But looking at Julian, she saw something new in his eyes. It was no longer just arrogance. It was calculation. It was doubt. He was using her, yes, but he was also protecting her in his twisted way. "Walk," the guard whispered to her, gently pushing her toward the revolving door. They stepped out of the building into the cool night of the city. The sprinkler rain had stopped, but the pavement glistened under the neon lights and the headlights of cars. In front of the main entrance, Julian's armored black Maybach waited like a beast, asleep with the engine running. The driver, a robust man named Victor, opened the back door. "Victor," Julian said as he approached. "Scenic route to the restaurant. I want privacy. Raise the divider." "Yes, sir." Julian paused before entering and looked at Nadia, who was shivering from the cold on the sidewalk. "Get in. Sit on the foldable seat in front of us, and don't say a word unless I ask." Nadia obeyed. She entered the luxury vehicle, feeling painfully out of place. The smell of new leather and air conditioning enveloped her. She sat on the small seat, facing backward, with her knees together, trying to take up as little space as possible. The Alford brothers got in next, sitting on the main beige leather seat. Julian sat next to them. The door closed with a heavy, airtight sound, sealing them in a capsule of silence and tension. The car smoothly pulled away, gliding through the city traffic. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Michael and Oliver looked out the window, avoiding Nadia's gaze, who was staring at them from her corner. Julian took a bottle. of water from the mini-fridge and took a long sip, watching his partners over the rim of the bottle. "You have a fascinating culture," Julian suddenly broke the silence. "I've always admired the complexity of your language. They say Arabic has hundreds of words for camel, but also hundreds for betrayal. Is that true, Michael?" Michael slowly turned his head. His eyes were two obsidian stones. "Arabic is a language of poets and warriors, Julian. We have words for everything that matters in life. Loyalty is one of them." "Loyalty," Julian repeated, savoring the word, "a concept that is dear these days." Nadia saw how Oliver discreetly slipped his hand into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He did it with slow movements, trying not to attract attention. His fingers flew over the screen, typing a quick message. Nadia knew what was happening. They were coordinating. The helicopter had failed, so they were activating the next phase. She had to warn Julian, but he had... A tense silence settled in. If he spoke now without evidence, the Alford brothers would simply deny everything, and Julian could lose the little patience he had left. He had to wait. He had to listen. Suddenly, Oliver's phone buzzed softly. He read the response, and a small, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. He put the phone away and looked at Michael, giving a slight nod. Michael visibly relaxed, sighed, and leaned back in his seat. "Julian, I apologize for our earlier reaction. It was a tense moment. We understand you must take precautions, but this woman is a problem. You should drop her at the next corner. It's not appropriate for her to be here." "She stays," Julian said firmly, "until I receive the mechanic's report." "As you wish," Michael replied, indifferently. "But when we reach the marginal Pinheiros, the signal will be lost. I hope your mechanic calls before then." Nadia felt a chill. The highway was only a few kilometers away. It was long, dark, and known to be a dead zone for communications and traffic cameras. If they were going to do something, it would be there. She looked at Julian, trying to convey her urgency through her gaze. Julian caught her eyes. There was a moment of silent communication. He saw the renewed panic in her. He saw the warning. Julian looked ahead at the partition separating him from the driver. He pressed a button on the armrest that activated the intercom with Victor. "Victor, how long until we reach the highway?" "2 minutes, sir," the driver's voice replied. Julian nodded, turning to the Alford brothers with a smile that didn't show his teeth. "You know, I was thinking about what she said regarding the jackals and the kings. It's curious. My father always told me that in business there are no friends, only aligned interests." "Your father was a wise man," Michael said, glancing at his watch, "but sometimes interests change." "Exactly," Julian said. "Interests change, and so do roots." Julian pressed the intercom button again. "Victor, don't take the highway. Divert through Avenue Paulista. I want to see the city." The faces of Michael and Oliver changed instantly. The mask of calm cracked. "This will delay us by 20 minutes, Oliver protested, his voice rising an octave. "We're hungry, Julian. The highway's faster." "I'm not in a hurry," Julian replied, observing their reaction with clinical fascination. "Why the urgency to enter a dark road? Afraid of the light?" Michael leaned forward, his hand sliding into his jacket. "Julian, stop joking. Take the highway. It's a matter of safety. We don't like being exposed on open avenues." Nadia saw Michael's hand movement. She noticed the bulge beneath the thin fabric of his suit. It wasn't a wallet. It was a gun. "He has a gun!" Nadia shouted, breaking her vow of silence. Everything happened in an instant. Michael pulled out a black pistol with a silencer. Julian, reacting purely on reflex, dove to the side, but the space was tight. "Victor!" Julian shouted. The car swerved violently. Victor, hearing the chaos, jerked the wheel sharply. The heavy Maybach skidded, throwing everyone to one side. Michael's Shot went astray, hitting the leather seat where Julian's chest had been just a second before. The sound was a muffled puff, absorbed by the car's insulation. Nadia was thrown against the door. Oliver lunged over Julian, trying to hold him so his brother could aim again. "Kill him now!" Oliver shouted in Arabic. "Kill him before we reach Paulista!" Julian fought back, punching and kicking, but it was 2 against 1 in a confined space. Michael raised the gun again, aiming at Julian's head. Nadia didn't think. There was no time for fear, only time for action. She saw the thick glass water bottle that Julian had left in the cup holder. She grabbed it with both hands, and with a scream that came from the roots of her ancestors, lunged forward. She shattered the base of the bottle against Michael's wrist with all her strength. The sound of a bone cracking echoed. Michael cried out in pain, and the gun fell to the floor of the car. "Drive, Victor! Get us out of here!" Julian shouted, freeing himself from Oliver's grip with a brutal elbow to the nose. The car accelerated, the V12 engine roaring like a waking dragon. Nadia threw herself to the floor, searching for the gun among the feet of the struggling men. Her hands touched the cold metal. "I have it!" Nadia gasped. She raised the pistol, her hands trembling, but aimed directly at Michael's chest. "Sit down!" Nadia shouted, surprised by the ferocity of her own voice. "Sit down and don't move, or I swear I'll shoot." Michael and Oliver froze. They looked at the maid, the invisible woman, who now held their lives at the end of a barrel. They looked at Julian, who was rubbing his bruised throat, a look of murderous rage on his face. The interior of the armored Maybach had turned into a pressure cooker where the air seemed to solidify. Victor, the driver, gripped the wheel with white knuckles, weaving through the traffic of Avenue Paulista at a speed that defied the laws of physics, yet with surgical precision. In the back cabin, time had stopped. Nadia, the woman who hours earlier had been cleaning the fingerprints off that same mahogany table, now held a Glock 17 with both hands. Her fingers, reddened from chlorine and hard work, trembled visibly around the black polymer grip. But the barrel did not waver. It pointed directly at the heart of Michael Alford, who held his broken wrist, his face contorted in a grimace of pain and pure hatred. Julian Sanders was breathing heavily, rubbing his throat where Oliver's fingers had left red marks. He looked at Nadia, truly seeing her for the first time. He didn't see the grey uniform, the stained apron, or the dishevelled hair. He saw a warrior who had emerged from nowhere to stand between him and death. "No one move," Nadia repeated, her voice steady, adrenaline-fueled, yet carrying an authority that did not belong to her by contract, but by blood right. "Mr. Sanders, grab Oliver's phone." Oliver Alford, who was frozen with his hands half raised, tried to protest. "Put that gun down, stupid girl. Before you make a mistake you'll pay for with your life." "Cop!" Nadia shouted. "Mr. Sanders, the phone is proof. They were coordinating the attack on the highway." Julian lunged at Oliver and snatched the phone from his hand. The Arab magnate tried to resist, but Julian, driven by a cold fury, delivered a sharp blow to his stomach that left him breathless. Julian unlocked the screen. Oliver hadn't had time to lock it after reading the last message. "It's in Arabic," Julian said, looking at the incomprehensible characters glowing on the screen. "I don't understand anything." Nadia, without taking the gun off Michael's chest, diverted her gaze to the phone screen that Julian held before her. Her eyes scanned the messages. She felt a deep nausea, reading the coldness of the words, the bureaucratic planning of a murder. The last message sent 2 minutes ago reads, "What does it mean?" Julian asked, looking at Oliver with eyes that promised terrible revenge. "It means the trap is ready on the highway. Team B is waiting for our signal. Leave no one alive," Nadia translated. The silence that filled the car was heavier than lead. Julian read the previous message from Michael to Oliver. "And this?" Julian asked. "The idiot changed the route. Improvise. Use it now. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Nadia translated. Julian leaned back in his seat, feeling reality hit him like a freight train. The idiot, as they called him, the financial genius, the man of the year, reduced to an idiot in a text message while they toasted with their vintage champagne, turned to Michael, who was groaning, clutching his broken wrist. "A robbery gone wrong," Julian whispered. "They were going to kill me and dump my body on the highway like trash, weren't they? After signing the contract, after giving access to my accounts." "It's business, Julian," spat Michael, the pain breaking his mask of civility. "It's always been business. Your company is overextended. You needed our capital. We just needed your infrastructure. You were a necessary obstacle that became unnecessary." "Why?" Julian asked with morbid curiosity. "Couldn't they have bought the company?" "Because pride is expensive," Oliver interjected, regaining his arrogance despite being unarmed. "You wouldn't sell. You wanted to be a partner. You wanted to sit at the table with us as an equal. But you're not an equal, Sanders. You are a child playing with new money. We are the owners of history." "Owners of history?" Nadia's voice cut through Oliver's tirade. Nadia lowered the gun slightly, though her finger remained on the trigger. She looked at the two men with a mix of contempt and deep pity. "You own nothing," Nadia said in Arabic, her pronunciation perfect and sharp. "You speak of lineage and history, but you have forgotten the first lesson of the desert. Honor is not in blood, but in deeds." Oliver stared at her, not at the gun, but at the purity of her accent. It was the accent of ancient poets, of scholars, not the street dialect. "Who are you?" Oliver whispered. "How do you know our language better than our own children?" "I am Nadia. I am the great-granddaughter of Abraham al-Khatib, a man who fled his homeland, because men like you, jackals disguised as kings, burned his home for power. He cleaned bathrooms in this country for 40 years so our family could eat. But he was more of a king than both of you combined, because he never had to kill to feel great." Julian watched Nadia. At that moment, the cleaner completely disappeared. The hierarchy of the world had inverted inside that car. The millionaire and the magnates were spectators. The woman in the dirty uniform was the only one who possessed the truth and the moral strength. Suddenly, Oliver's phone began to ring, an incoming call. The name on the screen read Team B. The car continued speeding down Fifth Avenue, moving away from the highway, but the danger had not passed. If Team B realized they had failed, they would come after them. "Answer," Julian said, grabbing the phone. "Put it on speaker. And if you say one code word, if you try to alert them, I swear I'll let her shoot. And believe me, Oliver, she has more reasons to do it than I do." Oliver looked at the gun in Nadia's hands. He saw the tremor, yes, but he also saw the determination of someone protecting something sacred. It was not the weapon of a mercenary. It was the weapon of a vigilante. And that scared him. Oliver slid his finger and answered, "Yes, sir. The target did not enter the highway. We see him on Fifth Avenue, proceeding to intercept. We are 2 minutes away." The voice on the other end was professional, military. Julian looked at Nadia. She nodded, understanding every word. "Tell them to abort," Julian whispered, pressing the barrel of the gun he had gently taken from Nadia against Oliver's leg. Oliver swallowed hard, sweat trickling down his forehead. "There," Oliver said into the phone, his voice trembling. "Erito elhaf mutayakev, onakorta, insabibo, do not abort. The target is alert. The police, withdraw. Sidaro and the squad. Sir, we have visual. We can neutralize him now." "Coltinbo," shouted Oliver. "It's an order. Return to base." "Mafum, Nahib. Understood. We are withdrawing." The call dropped. Julian exhaled the breath he had been holding in his lungs, allowing himself to fall against the back of the seat, passing the gun to his left hand. "Victor," Julian said into the intercom. "Did you hear that?" "Loud and clear, sir," replied the tense voice of the driver. "I've already alerted the private security of the mansion and the police. They are waiting for us. At mile marker 40, we are safe." The word safe seemed to break the spell that kept Nadia standing. Adrenaline abruptly left her body, leaving her empty, exhausted. Nadia was terrified by what she had just done. She had struck a man, pointed a gun, taken control of a high-risk situation. The gun slipped from her fingers and fell onto the wool carpet of the car. Nadia covered her face with her hands and began to sob. It was not a lament of weakness, but the release of unbearable tension. Julian looked at the Alford brothers, who were huddled in their corner, defeated and humiliated. Then he looked at Nadia. Slowly, Julian leaned forward, picked up the gun, and locked it. Then he did something he had never done in his life. He took off his jacket, that Italian jacket worth $5,000, which he had worried about staining just hours before, and placed it over the shoulders of the woman. "Nadia," Julian said, his voice soft, devoid of his usual arrogance. "Look at me." Nadia raised her head. Her eyes were red, her face stained with tears and dirt. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It caused trouble. I just didn't want him to die." "Trouble?" Julian let out an incredulous, almost hysterical laugh. "Nadia, you just saved my life, my company, and probably my soul. You gave me the most brutal lesson in humility in history." He turned to Michael and Oliver. "Look at her," Julian ordered, his voice hardening like steel. "Look closely, because this woman, whom you called crazy, whom I despised, is worth more than all your damned oil. You have money, but you are poor. She has nothing and just showed us what true wealth is." The car began to slow down. In the distance, the blue and red lights of police cars illuminated the night, waiting on the shoulder. It was the end of the journey, but the beginning of something different. Julian looked back at Nadia. "You told me your great-grandfather taught you that language is the key to truth." Nadia nodded, drying her tears with the silk sleeve of Julian's jacket. "He was right," Julian said. "I have been deaf my whole life. I listened to flattery, I listened to lies, I listened to what I wanted to hear. But today, thanks to you, I finally heard the truth." The car stopped. Victor opened the door from the outside. The fresh night air entered the cabin, clearing the smell of fear and violence. Julian got out first. The police approached with their weapons drawn, pointing at the car, confused. "Drop the weapon!" shouted an officer. Seeing the gun in Julian's hand, he raised his hands, carefully leaving the weapon on the ground. "Calm down. I'm Julian Sanders. The men in the back seat are international criminals. They tried to kill me. I have their confessions recorded on their own phones. Arrest them." As the police pulled Michael and Oliver out, handcuffing them and reading their rights amid shouts of diplomatic protest, Julian stood by the open car door, extending his hand to Nadia. "Come," he said to her. Nadia took his hand. The contact was warm and firm. Julian helped her out of the car onto the shoulder of the highway. Under the flashing of the sirens, Julian Sanders and Nadia, the great-granddaughter of Abraham, watched as they took away the dethroned kings. "Do you know what's more ironic?" Julian said, looking at the horizon where the city lights shone. "I spent years looking for partners who spoke my language of business, greed, power, conquest, and the only partner worth having was silently cleaning my footprints." He turned to her. "I have a question, Nadia, and I want the truth. Tell me why." Julian seemed genuinely confused. "After how I treated you, after I fired you, after I humiliated you in front of everyone, you could have let me get on that helicopter. You could have gone home and rid yourself of a tyrannical boss. You could have refused to get in the car with me. Why risk your life for me?" Nadia looked at the night sky. She thought of Abraham. She thought of the war he fled, and how he always told her that hatred is a chain that binds you to your enemy, but compassion is the wings that set you free. Because my great-grandfather taught me one last thing, Mr. Sanders, Nadia said softly. Julian waited, fascinated. What does that mean? Generosity is not about giving what you have left over, but giving what you need. I needed my pride, I needed my security, but you needed your life. And a man's life, any man's life, is worth more than my pride. Julian was left speechless, feeling a knot in his throat that no million-dollar deal had ever caused. He realized he was a small man standing next to a giant. "Thank you," was all he could say, and for the first time in his life, the word did not sound empty. A police officer approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Sanders, we need to take statements from all witnesses. Who is this young lady? Is she part of your security team?" Julian looked at Nadia, wrapped in his jacket, chin held high despite her exhaustion. "No, officer," Julian said, placing a protective hand on Nadia's back. "She is not security. She is my savior, and from this night on, she is my chief advisor. Treat her with the respect a queen deserves." The police chief approached Julian, closing his clipboard. "We have everything we need for now, Mr. Sanders. The recordings on the phones are damning, and with your testimony and that of the young lady," the officer looked at Nadia with respect, "I don't believe these two will see the light of day for a long time. The charges range from conspiracy to commit murder to corporate terrorism." "Thank you, Captain," Julian said, his voice hoarse. "Make sure they don't have access to lawyers until I speak with my legal team. I want them to rot." The officer nodded and walked away. Julian was left alone with Nadia on the shoulder of the highway, surrounded by the hum of distant traffic and the smell of wet asphalt. Julian turned to her, looked at her, truly looked at her. Nadia looked. Stripped of her invisibility, she saw the water stains on her grey uniform, her hands reddened from hard work, the exhaustion in her dark eyes, and felt a wave of shame so deep that she had to look away for a second. "Nadia," Julian said softly. She raised her head, startled, as if expecting a reprimand. "Mr. Sanders, please stop calling me Mr." Julian requested, running a hand over his tired face. "After tonight, I think the title is too much for me." Nadia did not respond, merely adjusting her blazer over her shoulders, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. "There's something I need to know," Julian continued, looking at her again. "I heard that your great-grandfather was Abraham Al-Khatib. He said he fled from the war." "Yes," Nadia whispered. "How?" Julian searched for the words. "How did you end up here, Nadia? How does a woman with your intelligence, your command of languages, your courage, end up cleaning up the mess of men like me for minimum wage?" Nadia sighed. She looked at the city lights shining on the horizon. This city that promised dreams, but often only delivered bills. "My family's story is not unique, Julian," she said, using his name for the first time. It sounded strange on her lips, but right. "My great-grandfather was a scholar in his land. He had land, books, respect. But when the bombs fall, paper burns, and respect doesn't stop bullets, they fled with the clothes on their backs." Nadia paused, fighting against the lump in her throat. "They arrived here with nothing. My great-grandfather's title meant nothing in a country where he didn't speak the language. He cleaned bathrooms, carried boxes, swept streets. My grandfather did the same. My father died working on a construction site when I was a child. There was no insurance. There was no compensation. Just silence." Julian listened, hypnotized. It was the invisible story behind the city he thought he dominated. "My mother got sick 2 years ago," Nadia continued, her voice trembling. "Treatments are expensive. I was studying translation and interpretation at NYU, but we had to choose. Either we paid for the books, or we paid for the medicine, or we ate, or we studied." She shrugged, a small and painful gesture. It wasn't a hard choice. Family comes first. So I left university and took the job at the Sanders Group, double shifts. It pays the bills, keeps my mother alive. That's all that matters. That's not all that matters, Julian said firmly. That's not all that matters. Julian reached into his pants pocket and pulled out his checkbook. He opened it and, using the car hood as a table, scribbled a figure. He tore out the check and extended it to Nadia. Nadia took it, confused, looked at the amount, and her eyes widened completely. It was more money than she would earn in 10 years, enough to pay for her mother's treatment, buy a house, finish college. "This is," Nadia began to say. "It's a reward," Julian quickly interjected, "for saving my life, for saving the company. It's fair. Take it, go home, take care of your mother, finish your studies. Forget that you ever had to clean up my mess." Nadia looked at the check. The paper trembled in her hands. It was the easy way out. It was the solution to all her problems. She could leave right now and never look back. But then she thought of Abraham, thought of the dignity with which he carried his poverty. She thought of what he would say if he saw her accepting money from a man who until an hour ago didn't even know her name. Slowly, Nadia extended her hand and returned the check to Julian. Julian blinked in astonishment. "What are you doing? It's not enough. I can double it. Can I?" "It's not about the amount, Julian," Nadia gently interrupted him. "I didn't do it for money. I didn't save you to collect a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I did it because my great-grandfather taught me that if you see an injustice and do nothing, you are part of it." "But your mother, your studies," Julian stammered, unable to process that someone would reject a fortune. "I'll find a way," Nadia said, chin held high. "We always find a way, but I won't take your money as if it were charity or payment for services rendered. My dignity is not for sale." Julian looked at her, and at that moment his world shattered completely. He realized how poor he truly was. He had buildings, helicopters, accounts in Switzerland, but he didn't have a fraction of the integrity that this woman possessed in her pinky finger. Julian tore the check into pieces and let the wind carry the fragments away. "You're right," Julian said, nodding. "You're absolutely right. Money is the only thing I know how to give, and it's insulting to offer it now." He straightened up, adjusting his disheveled tie. His face took on a new expression, a seriousness that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with respect. "Nadia," Julian said formally, "I don't want to give you money. I want to offer you a job." Nadia looked at him apprehensively. "A job? Starting tomorrow, I want to hire you as my international relations advisor and cultural consultant." Nadia let out an incredulous laugh. How could she possibly fill that role? "I don't have a degree. I don't have experience." "You have something that no Harvard MBA can teach," Julian replied, pointing to the place where they had taken the Alford family. "You have instinct, you have honor, you have the ability to see the truth when all the rest of us are blinded by ambition, and you speak languages that open doors or close traps." Julian took a step toward her. "The company will pay for your education so you can formalize your degree. You will have flexible hours to take care of your mother, and your salary will be comparable to that of a high-level executive, not as a gift, but because you will deserve it. I need you, Nadia. I need someone by my side who isn't afraid to tell me the truth, even if it hurts. I need someone to remind me that I'm not a god, but a man who can make mistakes." Nadia studied him. She looked for lies, traps, arrogance, but only saw a man who had just awakened from a long dream of pride and was asking for help to not fall asleep again. "International relations advisor?" Nadia asked, testing the words. "And my right hand," Julian added. "I'm firing my team of advisors tomorrow. They were useless, only knowing how to applaud. I want to surround myself with real people." Nadia thought of her mother, thought of Abraham, thought of all the years of silence, of invisibility, and realized that Abraham wouldn't want her to be a martyr. He would want her to take her rightful place. "I accept," Nadia said with one condition. "Whatever it is, you will respect me and never silence me again when I have something to say." Julian smiled. It was a genuine smile, tired but real, the first that Nadia felt relieved by. "Ah, yes, I've been an idiot. Until now. My apologies come late. I truly regret it. With this near-death experience, I realized how wrong I was. Perhaps I won't lose the idiot side overnight, but I will strive to be a better person. I'm not saying I'll be an angel to everyone, but you, the person to whom I owe my life, I will treat like the Queen of Arabia." Nadia smiled. He was definitely an eccentric man, but he wasn't bad. A job like this, his studies, it was all a great opportunity. So I accept. If I regret it later, I can still cash the check. Julian laughed. "Come on, Nadia, Victor will take us home. We have a lot of work tomorrow. There's an empire to clean up. And I'm not talking about the floors." 3 months later, the afternoon sun bathed the old city cemetery in a golden, warm light. It was a peaceful place, far from the noise of skyscrapers and sirens. Nadia walked along the gravel path, dressed in a perfectly fitting tailored navy suit. In her hands, she held a bouquet of fresh jasmine. She stopped before a simple grey stone grave. The letters were worn by time, but the name remained clear: Abraham Al-Khatib. Nadia knelt and carefully placed the flowers. She touched the cold stone with her fingers. "Hello, Grandpa," Nadia whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I've been busy, very busy." She smiled, remembering the last few weeks, the meetings, the travels, the surprised faces of executives when the former cleaning lady corrected their translations or pointed out cultural flaws in their proposals. Julian had kept his word. It hadn't been easy. He had to study twice as hard, work 3 times as much, and endure envious looks. But every night he came home and saw his mother receiving the best medical treatment, calm, without fear of the future. "You were right, Grandpa," Nadia said, tears shining in her eyes. "Language is the key, but not just to knowledge. It's the key to dignity." The wind rustled the leaves of the trees, creating a whisper that sounded like a response. "I saved a man who was lost in his own castle, who I think he saved me too, gave me the opportunity to show that his blood, our blood, is not invisible." Nadia stood up, smoothing her skirt. She felt strong. She felt complete. In the distance, near the entrance of the cemetery, a black car waited. Julian leaned against the door, checking his watch, but without impatience. When he saw Nadia rise, he waved his hand in greeting. Nadia looked at the grave one last time. "Thank you for the legacy. It wasn't gold or land, it was something better. It was my voice." Nadia turned and walked towards the car, towards Julian, towards her future. Her steps echoed firmly on the gravel. She no longer walked on tiptoes to avoid making noise. Now every step left a mark. Abraham Al-Khatib rested in peace, knowing that his great-granddaughter, the girl who listened to stories on the worn carpet, had finally learned to roar. Sometimes the most important lessons come from those whom the world insists on ignoring. If this story moved you, if you felt the power of dignity in the face of arrogance, don't forget to like, subscribe for more soul-touching stories, and we'll see you in the next story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Leave in the comments what part moved you the most and from which city you are watching. Your participation is very important to us, and if you have a chosen family story to share, we would love to read it in the comments. Until the next story.